Welcome, everybody, to Dead South Paranormal. We have a different kind of show here for you today. We are joined by Mr. Micah Singleton. We appreciate you being here, Micah, and thank you for coming on the show. He's got.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Mike has got quite the story to tell, and we're going to kind of tell it as best as we can, the way Micah wants it told. And I found different parts of it very interesting, and I think you will the same. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be discovering tonight, just as you guys are hearing it. So this is going to be all brand new. Joey, you got anything you want to add, buddy?
No, I do appreciate Micah for being here. Especially we kind of pulled this thing together pretty quick this week.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact. So we didn't have anything really planned. I think we were going to kind of record some talking about ghost stories type stuff that people have seen already. But this came together really quick. I appreciate Micah reaching out to us. And you reached out to us over Facebook. Am I correct? And got everything taken care of with that. So, Micah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to y'all. Jeremy, you have a little more detail about the situation. So I'm kind of following where y'all lead tonight.
So, Micah, tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I was born and raised in good old Georgetown, South Carolina, founded by accident by a Spaniard blown into Winyah Bay around 1526. That was one of the claim to fames. We were one of the first settlements that lasted for about a year for the Spanish, but it only lasted for a year because they allegedly, let's just say they weren't too nice to the locals at that time, and the locals were ready for them to leave. But aside from that, I was born and raised there, child of the early 70s. Grew up, went to school in the same area. And for the most, I was, an only child, which was great because I basically had mom all to myself. And I also I was blessed to have one of the most spiritual mothers that could ever guide a person that had questions as such. I graduated in 1990 and spent a lot of my time, of course, in this area. Georgetown at that time didn't have many jobs to offer, so I gradually migrated up toward the Myrtle Beach area and got a good degree in service industry for the many years, up until just a few years ago, actually. I've also worked around the beach area as an ocean lifeguard from 1999 to 2005. I also worked as a bouncer at some of the Broadway at the beach clubs. And the biggest claim to fame I think I have in this area is assisting in the raising of both of my daughters and becoming a member of the 5,000 Diaper Club. That's something that will really humble a man.
Oh, definitely.
But just, minus everything of the subject matter, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. To a degree, just one of your average guys, but also one thing to point out, I playfully make the joke, something that changed my life for the better was you had a choice when I was going to school. You could, if you wanted to spend your recess in the library, which was a great safe haven from bullies, you had to read a book. You couldn't just sit in there. So I spent a lot of time in the library, and it was when I discovered certain books, especially about my area concerning the local history, namely the life and times of the General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And now, granted, I started reading this book when I was about fourth grade. A lot of the old English kind of threw me off, but being in a family that prided themselves on books, I had my grandmother's 1920s Webster's Dictionary. So I would actually sit with that book, and when I found some of that old English, I would look it up for translation because I wanted to know the correspondence between them. And I found it fascinating. But that also led me to understand just exactly what a library has to offer. As I had expressed to you, I gave myself the self-entitled crown king of the local archive because of my fascination with the microfilm department, early newspaper articles that told so many stories that to me seemingly were forgotten.
That's very cool. I enjoyed you telling me about some of the things that you had run across and some of the stories that you have come across, and it kind of it was wild, Joey. Just to do a shameless plug here, but he has a Facebook page. You guys should go check it out. Cold Case Cryptids. But Joey, I wanted to throw this out there to you. I saw it the other day. He actually had a uh, newspaper article directly from Walterboro. I'm not sure if you remember which article I'm referring to there, Micah.
Oh, absolutely. There's only one from that area, and that would have been a very unique creature that, now, to be clear, that was out of the Georgetown Times and that was picked up on a dispatch. I believe that was a 1908 article, and it described, well, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but just in my humble opinion, if I were to look for any animal known in the world that it described, it would have been a hyena.
There you go. Thought that was pretty interesting there.
Well, it's interesting. Well, that is interesting. So I can actually speak to that, and it's funny. Um, my my boss that I actually work with, he is an older gentleman, and he has lived in the Colleton County, Walterboro area all his life, and they actually had at one time a train come through, and it did have an accident right outside of the town of Walterboro, and several of the animals that were on the train, it was a train actually transporting zoo animals, not the typical circus animal thing you always hear.
Mm-hmm.
They were transporting several zoo animals, and several of them um, escaped at the wreckage, and however they thought they had recovered them all. So I could, it would be interesting. I'll look up that article, and then I'll go talk with him and see if the time frames match up, and that might actually be the you know how you look at things and go, oh, hyenas or whatever in South Carolina. Well, there might actually be a legitimate reason for that, but I definitely remember him talking about that. So that's actually pretty cool that you're tied in down there because.
And once again, for any kids listening, all this was discovered in a library.
They're called books.
Exactly.
All right. So, Micah, we're going to go ahead and move on from that. So, just to give the folks a little bit of a background here, Micah, you sent me a picture of a list. And upon this list, this was basically, is this where you want to start? Let me confirm that first.
It I I'm kind of rolling the dice here because this is a first time for me, but I feel, considering some of the context that was mistaken in the past, it would be better.
Okay. Then this is the route we'll travel. So you've got you shared with me a picture, and it was a list, a timeline of events that you have titled the sleeping years. And there's a lot of interesting titles here, I'll give you that. And he's got them all, dates and everything associated with each, beside each event, I guess you could call it. Um, Now, do you mind walking us through that and kind of, I guess, in layman's terms, for those who have never heard this story, such as myself or Joey, as well as our listeners, let's break it down to most simplest terms here and kind of just break it down. We are dumb and you are our teacher. Let us have it.
Okay, the very first one, dated 1976. I wouldn't be comfortable reading the title just because of your listeners, but let's just say that was a key word for a meaning. The namesake in that title was kind of similar to what occurred, but this is concerning the first dream that I remember. And at that time, I would have been roughly about 3 or 4 years old. I recall having a dream that was probably my first lucid dream to where I felt real. And I was walked into my backyard that was fenced in where I played every single day. Except when I got in that backyard, I saw, you have to forgive me, I'm very much sanitizing this. I saw family members that were in compromised positions of, basically they were all tied up, and they were tied up to different columns.
Okay.
And there was a figure that was standing beside me as suddenly I went third person and I was viewing from the outside. And the things they showed me that I won't repeat were things that today, in a bad sense, could be found on the dark web. But what threw me back is that I know for a fact there was no way I could have seen a video, a film, or anything that would have influenced the graphic nature of that. But the reason I titled it as I did was because it was very hardcore. It was something that I personally had never seen, and my reaction to it was I was detested. I was sickened by it. And, you know, when I awoke, I'm not ashamed to say it, I had wet my bed. I was scared. I was screaming. My mom was trying to figure out what was wrong. And then, of course, I got a little lip service for wetting the bed. But later, I recall it was much later that day. I was going outside to play. And as I began walking outside to go under the garage, all of a sudden, I was walking to my neighbor's garage. And that was not what I was trying to do. And it was at that point I realized I did not have control over my legs, my arms, or anything. It was like I was on autopilot. And I began screaming in confusion. And I mean screaming as only a child could. As I got under that garage, I walked straight over to a can of gasoline that was in my neighbor's garage. It was an open door garage. And I picked it up and began pouring it all over myself. And I'm wailing. The chemical burn began, as when I say all over myself, I mean all over me. And I was still like I was on autopilot. And I looked over and saw where I was walking to next as it was burning me, and I was screaming. I reached up and grabbed a pack of matches. And again, I can't emphasize, I had no control over this. And as I was screaming and it was like I was trying to take a match out, but my hands were trembling. All of a sudden, my grandfather yelled my name because he heard me screaming. The moment he yelled my name, I had full control of myself, and I ran to him. He could easily smell what happened, and he took me, started soaping me down with the greaser and washing me outside, then took me into the bathtub and cleaned me up. My grandfather was very stern. He was a World War II veteran, and if you know your terminology for a veteran, he started in 1942 and ended up coming home in 46 with 7 battle stars. He was in the thick of it, starting from Africa all the way up to Belgium. He was a man that had seen many things, and he was very stern, and it was like he showed me nothing but compassion. He never told my mother, never told my grandmother, and honestly, that pretty much sums up the very first one that I know was 1976, because that was the time frame in which I was living at that residence.
So I'm going to just speak on this, and if you don't mind, I would like to share the title of that event that you have marked down. Is that okay? I mean, I don't mind saying it.
If you're comfortable with it, I was trying to be respectful to you.
I
and your
completely
listeners.
understand.
All right.
So with that being said, that title was called, correct me if I'm mispronouncing it, but Demon Desaad. Is that correct?
That is correct. I labeled it kind of cynically, but it very much applies because the images I saw would have been straight out of a file or folder if Marquis Desaad was alive today.
I understand. That is very brutal and very mature content, and so thank you for dumbing it down. But on the same hand, I got to go back. I got to kind of recount some of this stuff. So this occurred. You said you were about 3 or 4 years old, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You said initially that when you had what you would call like a dream, you were out in your backyard and you saw your family. They were tied up, and these deplorable things were happening to them, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you said there was a figure there. Can you describe that figure? Can you remember that figure, what it looked like?
Compared to my size at that time, because it stood right beside me, but when I focused on it in my dream, it was almost as if it was blurred. And, not to go Hollywood, but very similar. It was like I got one quick glimpse. It was about, I want to say it was right at 6 foot tall compared to, all the, everything that was around me plus my size. And I got one quick glimpse of it. It was mostly dark. It was demonic looking by every aspect for just a fleeting moment. And then it was almost similar to, not that I'm saying this is the answer, but it was like it knew I could see it, but it didn't want me to see it. And I firmly believe now, as the story progresses, you'll hear some more evidence to kind of back up my belief that it tried to stray me in a dark path. It tried to make me desire those things that I saw, but the fact that it failed and that I was detested by everything, I think it pulled a kill switch on me because of what occurred later that day.
Right. And so just to verify for the audience that the events that you're referring to for later that day was the fact that you went to the neighbor's garage and doused yourself in gasoline from head to toe practically, and then proceeded to grab a box of matches and basically fighting yourself against your will to light a match, basically. Um, and then that is, of course, as soon as your grandfather called your name, you had control over your body again. Is that correct?
Very chilling, but very correct.
Okay, very good. Joey, do you have anything you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to add to that?
Not really. It's pretty, to be honest, it's a pretty detailed account, especially happening 47 years ago now. I know that because of what my age is, but it is. It's kind of interesting to note that when you, it's hard for me to put into words what I'm trying to ask, but it is after you had this episode or this situation occur to you where you lost control, but you had at least cognitive remembrance of it. What, and I know you were very young, what was your, like reaction to that? How did that affect you moving forward is kind of my question.
As I was moving forward, some people wouldn't be as blunt as I am, but I feel that overall, I was, my grandfather became my hero that day. He was my hero before that and to this day, but more so that day than ever before. And I, unfortunately, the one thing I could not get rid of was my fascination with fire. I, unfortunately, as a child, I became, looking at this as an adult now with children, I could see it in a different light, but I carried a desire, no shy way of saying it. I was a pyromaniac. I loved playing with fire, and sadly, I have no memory of it, but it was told to me that at one point I had stolen some matches and was trying to build a fire beside my neighbor's house and almost burned it down.
To be honest with you, I think that's something that is. I think it's young boys in general that want to play in the fire, and as like my grandmama used to tell me that, hey, you play in the fire, you wet the bed at night.
You know what? That kind of relates to me in so many ways.
So I noticed. But yeah, I just think it's something ingrained in little kids, in little boys, especially, that just something about fire that it fascinates us for whatever reason or another, that we got to put that stick in the fire when our parents are outside burning off leaves or whatever it is that they're doing, or maybe they're just outside near a campfire. We've got to be near it. We've got to put a stick in it. We got to throw something in it that's probably not supposed to be there. And I just think that's just something in all of us as a kid.
Yeah, I think so too, because I've done some, I'd say kind of some, probably not the smartest things in the world with fire.
You and me both.
And with my background as well, as you know, Jeremy, I deal with those kids in those situations a lot sometimes. So.
And see, it's transferred over to us, especially down here in the South. We now have big boy fire. We have tannerite. So,
oh, trust me, I hear the souls of many hogs go up quite often where I'm located.
My goodness. All right, so moving on to the second event in this timeline, which, from what I have here, it was between 1980 and 1981, and you have it titled "Dark IQ Test Results." Can you go into detail about that?
Absolutely. What's significant about those years is, fondly, I remember that school year. It was, I watched the first space shuttle launch from our classroom on TV, and also watched the inauguration of President Reagan and Vice President Bush, same year. But they also did our IQ tests. And I, at the time, was unaware of what it was. I just thought it was a weird test because they said I couldn't get any answer wrong and just to answer what I could. Well, I remember taking that test and my teacher telling me, Miss McAllister, I loved her to death. She was awesome. I remember her telling me, Micah, you're not going home today when the bell rings. Your mom's coming up to the school, and we need to have a conference. And I'm like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. So I remember when my mom got there, they sat me she had me sit in the back of the room. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but it was the very first time I saw my mother get mad at the teacher. And, you know, I'm looking at two people. Of course, I love my mother more, but, you know, I had a great love for my teacher. She was wonderful. And I didn't understand why the two were arguing. And to shoot forward, many decades later, I got the answer. And that was, unfortunately, after my mother had passed on. I asked my grandmother about that situation. I said, you know, that memory always stuck with me. She said, well, Micah, they tested your IQ, and it was so high that they said to your mother, yes, Janice, he broke your record that was set at this school, but we feel that you would expect way too much out of him if we were to tell you what his IQ is. So the reason I stated it dark IQ was not for nefarious means. It's because my mother and I both were kept in the dark as to actually what it was. They told her that public school had nothing to offer me, that I really should be enrolled in some type of private school where I could get some more one-on-one curriculum, that basically I did not show the interest because I seemingly, well, that would be my speculation past that point. My speculation is that they thought I would be a bad influence to the other kids that were trying to learn, because I was on some, not all, but just on some levels, a little bit more cognitive of computing the results a little quicker than them. And that me not showing any interest in anything may very well just, you know, rub the wrong way, a bad leading by example kind of thing.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I'm not trying to play, you know, therapist here, but how did that make you feel? Can you recall? I mean, did you kind of, I mean, I guess you wouldn't know it as a child because you found out years later, but I mean, did you ever kind of see yourself as different from the other children in any aspect like that, you know, as far as school and, you know, thinking and, you know, calculating and stuff like that? Did you ever feel different, set apart almost?
Not really at that time, but I did notice that some things were a little bit clearer to me as a child and as I aged than most other kids. And of course, when I would try and explain it to someone else, how I had, you know, come up with the answer, or honestly trying to help them in the way I saw that I came up with the answer, because I not that I felt bad for them, but it was confusing as to why they didn't understand it as I did. You know, that was my childlike deduction of it. But when my grandmother told me that so many years later, That was roughly around 2006, 2007, just prior to her passing when she told me that. That was, it became very clear. And, you know, I'm, to a degree, to a great degree, I wouldn't change any of those events as they transpired, even if I had the ability to, because it, you know, I actually have enough empathy. I can understand the position of the school, which, you know, not telling my mother. Back then, you know, it was, you know, back then we had corporal punishment. You got paddles, you got licks. It was a whole different ballpark. And, you know, they could, back then people didn't question when you made a call like that. Nowadays, of course, that wouldn't fly. But that was, that's pretty much how I would sum that up. But again, you know, I really didn't see myself set apart. I mean, I was not actually a straight A student. I was barely scraping by and actually failed a few grades. It just, but you know, I would close it in saying, just with my honest reflection, that it, part of me felt like everything was just being repeated to me, and I hated being told things twice, even though I was hearing them for the first time.
Interesting view of that. Joey, you got anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that is, it's unusual sometimes. And, you know, I've run across some highly intellectual people in my career, especially in the field of science and medicine. And, you know, it's odd that you say that. And I've had some similar instances where I wasn't, I'm not going to, well, I'm just going to say it like I think. I wasn't, as far as grades, the smartest kid in school, but I definitely had an advantage over the other ones. And I don't want to say it was premonition or anything like that, but it was definitely, you have advantages, that again, what caught my ear was, even though you'd heard it the first time, you were getting tired of being told something twice. It was like you just already knew it. It was like it was just instilled in you as a natural component of your makeup. And, you know, I don't think you're alone in that is the thing. And I think we see that now. And we also see that the fact that people like that are more attuned and in tune with the metaphysical. And as we move on through this, we'll talk about the metaphysical components more that you have experienced, but, you know, it's seeing that other plane, that is there, that, you know, we as paranormal investigators believe is there. You have an affinity towards that. So it seems like from a very early age, you were definitely, your radio dial, so to speak, was on the right frequency for these experiences.
Right. Just one thing I would add to that I've actually recalled from memory, just in first grade when they actually taught us how to write our name. I always found it interesting that being able to remember the internal workings of myself at the time. And I don't attribute this to anything other than fact. And I'm not trying to speculate, but there was a strange thing. When they taught me how to write my name, I didn't feel that was my name. I wanted to write Mark. And I started signing all my papers as Mark. And, well, let's just say good Miss Ida Walker, my first grade school teacher, she would give me a smack on my hand with that ruler. One of the worst fears every kid had in school, but definitely got us motivated not to do whatever it is she said not to do.
All right. Yeah,
Interesting.
very
Interesting.
Joey, just to touch back on something you said a while ago, me and Joey, just to kind of put it in perspective for everyone, me and Joey graduated from the same school. And with that being said, I actually I transferred over in the 9th grade from another school. And I kind of understand, not that I was ever the smartest in the room at any given time, but after I moved, there were instances where I found myself arguing with the teacher because of things that I had heard before. That look, I already know this, and just to throw this out there, just as in the prime example and the one that pops into the forefront of my head. But in 6th grade at my old school, I actually went to Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we actually took a trip to Washington, D.C. It was a whole, like a 3 or 4 day trip. And Mom and Daddy wasn't happy to pay that price, but somehow I went. But anyway, when I got to, the school we graduated from, there was one of the teachers there had said, kept calling it Monticello. And I'm like, that's not the way that's pronounced. And, I was like, I corrected the teacher, which probably was a big no-no. But, I was like, well, I've been there. I've heard the way they say it there. You can't tell me you're right on this. But anyway, I understand where you're coming from, having to hear the same thing twice, because it's like,
Right.
I already know this. Why do I have to learn it, so to speak, again? And, so I kind of am on that level with you, to that extent. But I definitely agree that it kind of goes back to what Joey said. With, as paranormal investigators, the best tool that we work with is our intuition. And, that's just like going back now and looking at that, our investigation, our very first investigation in that cafeteria, and the EVP that we caught that night, better yet, Joey, that you caught that night, of what sounded like footsteps running through the room that we could not hear with our own 2 ears in that room. And here I am blindfolded trying to perform this Estes method. And I even told you beforehand, before I even heard that EVP, that where I was at, I felt uncomfortable. Things did not feel right, so on and so forth. And I felt like I was about to be attacked. And then you get an EVP like that, and it almost, like you said, it goes back and it kind of solidifies what I was feeling. And so it's funny that way.
Pardon me.
All right, so moving on to the next event in your timeline here, Micah. You have a specific date here, December 4th of 1981. The child that died alive. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. My mother pulled me out of public school, and she put me in a private school, a place called Georgetown Christian Academy. They had a smaller classroom, basically a one-room classroom with little cubicle dividers, and it was all grades from 1st grade to 12th grade. And I did get a lot of one-on-one, but while I was there, I recall that date specifically because that was also one of my uncle's birthdays. And I remember it was, if I'm correct, it was a Wednesday, because on it being a Christian school, we had chapel on Wednesday, and for chapel you had to wear a tie and your dress shoes. And boy, this is going to brush some dust off. Age betrayed. I was wearing a good old-fashioned pair of Buster Brown shoes that day that had no tread on the bottom.
Not the Buster Browns. I actually had those as well when I was a kid.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Those were not running shoes for certain, and you'll see why that's in that I'm bringing attention to that. Well, we had a shuttle van that was driven by the preacher's wife, a very wonderful lady by the name of Miss Nancy Hardwick, whom I love dearly, and even considering the situation that occurred, that I want to emphasize beforehand, was an accident, and I've never seen it any other way. But we had stopped to refuel on the way home, and for some reason they were curious that they thought they might have left the gas cap. When they went to go drop me off at my house, you know, I'm in, I'm a third grader, I'm still young, and an adult gave me a mission. I felt like I was given responsibility. She was like, hey, will you go check and see if the gas cap's still on? I'm like, oh, okay. So I went around the van, I looked, and I clearly remember the gas cap was not on. I walked right to the driver's side window, and I told her, I was like, no, Miss Nancy, y'all left it at the food chief. And she said, okay, and I walked around the front of the van, and it bumped me. And I started running. She didn't see me walk around the front of the van. I was very short, and this was about I want to say it was a 78 or 79 Chevy van. I started running. Probably not even, if I would say it, I'm probably 80 feet from a stop sign. And I'm looking at that stop sign. I don't have time to scream. I'm running. The van ended up bumping me in the back, knocking me down, and when my head, I went face first to the pavement, and my head bounced back up. That's when it got caught by the grill of the van and knocked back down. It placed my nose above my eyes, but also it turned me for a tumble underneath the van. And when she came, realizing that something had happened, she came to a dead stop. One of my shoes had gone off my left foot, and she had stopped with the tire on my left foot. And I was completely conscious, screaming as you would think. And I remember a gentleman, whom I won't name, getting out of the van and going, oh my God, you own his foot, you own his foot. And in the heat of the moment, he got back in the van and shut the door, and she backed up because he wasn't precise, and she stopped on my other foot that had a shoe on, and I began wailing again. He got out and said, you own his other foot, you own his other foot. And this time she went forward, ran over my left foot again, but stopped a few feet away. And I'm just laying there, screaming. And my mother came outside the house. When I saw my mother, bless her heart, when I saw my mother there, I quit screaming for Mom, and I started screaming for my grandmother, who was my second mother. And I just remember a crowd of people around me, the ambulance taking me to the hospital, and they, going, I specifically remember literally all of the events, including the one that I cynically, I can say this years later, but I showed him what an 8-year-old could do when he was scared. And the doctor came to me and said, Micah, I'm going to have to give you a shot. It's going to be directly in your nose, but it's so we can, we can stitch everything back up. And I remember going, okay, and I knew what was coming. My stepfather, who was right there at my side, I held his hand and squeezed it, and I took that first shot in my nose. And I remember it going through into my nostril, and I could feel the drip into it, but I stayed still because I was so scared that if I moved, I was going to break that needle off. Then he said, okay, we're going to have to give you another shot. And for the very first time in my life, I mean, I'll just backstep a second. I had a fear of authority. I did what I was told. But at that point was the very first time in my life I looked at that doctor, and I didn't care. My stepdad was right beside me. I didn't care if I got in trouble. I said, no, you're not doing that again. I remember him exchanging a look with my stepfather. And it was what I would know now is, you know what I have to do and you know what you need to help me with. So he held my arm down and they began holding me down, and well, I went wild. I wasn't going to allow it. And it ended up being about 8 people it took to hold me down. And I screamed. And even though I know it wasn't hatred, I guess in a childlike sense, I did feel that for everyone around me for what they were doing, because they ended up giving me 2 more shots directly into my nose. And it bothered me for a while, of course, but they ended up, of course, stitching me up. They did not keep me overnight. So they brought me home, and the reason I recall the exact date is because they had already planned a party for my Uncle Craig at my grandparents' house, and they brought me inside, carried me inside, sat me on the couch. And at that time, of course, I didn't know what narcotics were. I'm pretty sure they had given me some, but I just remember being real lethargic, being able to look at everybody, but everybody was coming in to look at me, and they were just shocked. I could see it on their faces. And later that evening, they picked me up and they brought me home. And as both of you will know, in a situation like that, the family comes together. And I remember they brought me inside and they laid me down in my bed, and they told me to try and get some sleep and let us know if you need anything. Well, me being the curious child, and also, I don't know if it was really my insomnia at that moment or what, but I had to use the bathroom, and, well, I got up out of bed. I went to go walk into the living room instead of the bathroom because I heard everybody in there. I wanted to see what I was missing. At that point, it was just like, oh, what are they up to? Wow, the whole family's here. It's pretty late at night. It probably had to be close to midnight. I walked in the room, and it was, I dare say, similar to an E.F. Hutton commercial that we remember from back in the day. Everybody that was talking, it was my entire family. They were there having coffee. They just stopped and looked at me like I was a ghost. And I thought I was in trouble for a moment. I was like, Mom, can I go to the bathroom? And she stuttered, and she's like, yes, honey, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I just got to use the bathroom. Went and used the bathroom, went back to bed, and I was out of school until after Christmas break, until the following year. And unbeknownst to me, here's the things I didn't factor in back then. They assumed that because of the tire being on both of my feet, that I would not be able to walk for a long time. But also, being in a good family, a good Christian family, as I was raised in, you put the call out for prayer on a moment like that. And just last year, a very older lady recognized me, and she said, oh my gosh, you're little Micah. You're not so little anymore. She goes, you might not remember, but I put my hand on your shoulder and said a prayer for you when you were behind that van. She was our neighbor. that lived across the street. And she said, you know that night, literally your entire hometown prayed for you. And that following Sunday, every preacher had a moment of prayer for you in every church from here to Charleston, because you were the boy that was supposed to die. They called me a miracle. And, part of me is very glad that I didn't know that earlier in life, because I'm wise enough now to know that I probably would not have comprehended it, or I may have been confused with what I thought the reality of that was, and come to different conclusions that could have led me on completely different paths in my life. But that was, that was why I kind of titled it that way, because there's no shy way of saying it that part of me did die that day. And it was, it was a part of me that I've lived without since. But what I'm really hoping is that would be the part of me that had an attachment from the situation that occurred I spoke of first in 1976. But also, again, I feel that was, and you'll see as these events transpire, I feel again that was the second time the kill switch was flipped, and whatever it was that was trying to influence me into a darker path, kind of figured, well, if we can't have him, we're not going to have him as an enemy later in life. That's again just my speculation, based on the events I've had to live with. And I would like a moment to say, I understand clearly this is my personal truth as I feel it, that my truth is not always going to be another person's truth, another person's conclusion, because, as unique as our fingerprints are to ourselves, so is the events in our life. No one can really say how another person feels. But then again, also, I've come to learn with the wisdom that I think would have been interfered with, is taking someone's observation of me from the outside, from a place I couldn't see. That's one of the reasons I'm actually grateful I didn't know all these things back then.
Very interesting stuff there, Mike. Joey, I'm going to let you take the reins on this one to begin with. What are your thoughts on that, if you have any at all?
Well, it's interesting, and he's absolutely right, especially during that time in history that a lot of folks truly believe in the power of prayer, and I do as well. And it's amazing how communities can come together over such a small, like we think of ourselves as, pardon me, kind of specks of dust in the universe. But the reality of it is that when tragedy occurs, the community will just surround you and really lift you up. But on the other side to that, looking back as, from the beginning of these occurrences, it is abundantly clear that there is a force, I'll call it a force at this point, that has had influences on the things that have occurred to you in your life, Micah. And again, I kind of like what you're saying, you weren't letting them have you, so they were trying to choose the option B there. And that's a powerful thing. And you run around, you hear all of these stories on the news media about children getting injured or killed by parents and things like that inadvertently by backing over them. I've had those types of situations in my career and things like that, and I've seen that in real life. And when you look at that, you look at the tragedy of the situation and the tragedy of loss that occurs. You almost kind of think sometimes that, and because I just have a point of view, Micah, that sometimes I'm just not worthy of even that kind of recognition. And so it allows me to think about, in a situation like that, even though the injury, the actual physical part of it is affecting you. What other forces out there are maybe trying to get at somebody else by utilizing you or using your life out there as well? Have you thought about, that kind of alternative take on it, that maybe the center of the that you're kind of the way to get into somebody else's life, or as we go through some of the more down the list of things here, we might be able to discover that. But that's something that it always reminds me that a lot of things is just not about us as individuals, but is about something greater or somebody else. And as a believer, God will work through another person for another person's good, and I have to also say that the devil would do the same thing if you look at it from that point of view. So have you looked at it from that point of view, Micah?
I've looked at it very, very much from that point of view, along with as many others as I could put in, because actually you'll understand this terminology because some of your videos that kind of led me to you, one thing I greatly appreciated was your mention of Occam's razor.
Yeah.
And when I came to learn that method of reasoning, placing it and utilizing it, it helped me open up to look at all possibilities, because the situation itself was just, literally, if you tell somebody, it's almost unbelievable to some degree, especially with the numerous others that occurred with me later in life. But one thing I do hold firm with is, and I try and be impartial to everything, but one thing I do know clearly, if there is a devil, he was pretty upset that I wasn't taking his side of events.
I understand that, and again, it's that broad thinking that gets us here. That's why we're in the business that we're into the paranormal, and when we look at good versus evil, when we look at God versus devil, we have to look at the children of God are the opponents of the devil, and anytime we don't do his will, he it makes him mad, and he can come after us. He can come after things that get to us, and that's that just speaks true. But as we move on, and we move on towards the summer of 1984, Micah, we have you titled it "Foe with the Face of a Friend." The doppelganging begins. And we spoke before the podcast began, and was talking about, just kind of mentioned about the doppelgangers and things like that. And that's something that in investigations we have to be acutely aware of, is, doppelgangers. One of the most common ones that you would see in investigation is a demon portraying themselves as a child to to gain entrance or to gain favor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to, I'd like to go on into that a little bit more and tell us your story, how the doppelgangers actually, and for the audience that doesn't quite understand what a doppelganger is, it is basically an entity, or it can be, if you look it up in Webster's dictionary, just a person that looks like another person. Throughout history, you see these photographs of, people that are separated by 100 years of death, and they look almost exactly alike. We call them, that's a doppelganger. They just look exactly alike. But when we look into the metaphysical, into the paranormal realm, we often see doppelgangers as being it is usually a negative entity. It is always a negative entity that is portraying something familiar or something comfortable to gain favor with whoever they're trying to affect. We often see this in demons portraying themselves as little children and then presenting themselves to little children to kind of get the in, so to speak. So just to kind of put that out there for those of you that may be unclear about that, that's kind of what we're talking about here with Micah. Micah, tell us about that.
Well, go ahead and I'm glad you're sitting down, because you literally, on several points, hit that hammer on the head. I mean, hit the nail on the head with a hammer. Summer 1984, I remember it clearly, and the reason I was able to date it 1984 is because that was the summer of the Summer Olympics. And I recall not long after the situation seeing that. But it was a Saturday morning, and I woke up at exactly 4:25 a.m., just out of a dead sleep. And I know the time because at the head of my bed, I had a little cubby, and I had this brand new fandangled technology. It was called a digital red letter clock. And I was able to see the time. I recognized it was 4:25 a.m., and I just looked at the foot of my bed, just laying there. And all of a sudden, I saw a little blur for a moment, and then I saw it fall below my sight line at the foot of my bed. And I was like, that kind of looked like a hand waving at me. And it didn't scare me. Strangely, at that point, it did not scare me. Then I saw it come up again, and this time it clearly looked like a right hand, because I remember the position of the thumb and everything, waving, and then went back down below the foot of my bed. Well, at that point, I bawled, just like in Hollywood in a situation like that. I balled my fists up, rubbed my eyes with them, and reopened them. And I'm still laying there going, oh my gosh, that was a hand. What the heck? Before I had time to think anything else, I clearly saw the hand come up, stay still for a moment, start waving. And this time I sat straight up as it went down below the bed, and I looked, and off to the corner of my room, I saw my cousin, who was 1 year and 1 day older than me. We always had our birthdays celebrated together, as is common with some families back then. And, she was also kind of my best friend, and it would not have been abnormal for her to be in my home, because at the time, her mother was having surgery done in Charleston at MUSC, and she was staying just a block away at my grandparents' house, where and it was common for her to come over about about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning when my grandfather went to work. She would stay over at our place. So when I saw her sitting there cross-legged, even in the ambient light, because I was right next to a church. It was a church called Maryville Pentecostalist Holiness Church. And just in that ambient light, and of course my night vision being kind of, at its optimum, I looked at her and went, "Oh gosh." And I remember exactly and verbatim my words. I looked at her and said, "Oh gosh, you scared me." And I laid back down. This is how I know it was a Saturday morning. I told her, "Hey, there's some Kool-Aid in the refrigerator, and I'm going to go back to sleep. Wake me up when the cartoons come on." And right before I shut my eyes, I looked up at that red-lettered clock, and it said 4:27 a.m., and it clicked. And I leapt back up and looked at her. She's still there. And I said, "Wait a second, what are you doing here so early? Granddaddy hadn't even got up to go to work yet." And she just smiled and grinned. And she was wearing the same clothes she was wearing the day before. It was like this little sailor's outfit. And she began rocking back and forth. And I'm looking at her. She's not responding. And after about 20 seconds of looking at her, I'm about to say something. And then I realize, wait, am I seeing my desk through her? And over the next 25 seconds, she slowly dematerialized into nothing. And my eyes froze open. I began feeling a confusing fear, probably the worst fear up to that point in my life. Even greater than when the 1976 gasoline incident. My eyes were just frozen, and I just knew I had to get out of that room. I crab crawled sideways, not taking my eyes off of the spot she was at, and I backed out my door. And as I backed out, the bathroom door was right beside me on my right. I opened that door, turned the light on, shut the door, and I put my back in the corner up against that door. And for the next 45 minutes, because of the situation, I actually spent 45 minutes in straight fear. And I know this kind of sounds humorous, and even I laugh at it, but the reason I had even double fear is because of what had just happened and the fact that the shower curtain in the bathroom was pulled halfway, and I was too scared to go check behind it. I was waiting for something to jump out at me at any moment. Yeah. And my stepdad, Clark, I heard him wake up a time after to get ready to go to work. He worked at the local paper mill, and he came and went to go open the door and saw he couldn't open it. And I kind of moved a little bit, but didn't get up, and he opened the door enough to peek his head in, and he saw me sitting behind the door with the light on. And then I'm like, oh, great, I'm in trouble now. I'm about to get a butt cut. That's what we referred to him as, for being up at night and plundering around, whatever. But he looked at me and said, "Micah." And I just couldn't respond to him. And then I saw the look come over his face. He knew something was wrong. And I felt the calmest voice come from him. He looked at me and said, "Come on, Boog," which my nickname was Boogie. He said, "Come on, Boog. Come on back to bed. It's okay." And just like with my grandfather, the moment he said that, I felt every bit of fear leave me. I got up, walked straight back to my room, didn't even look at that spot, didn't feel a bit of fear, laid back in that bed and went to sleep. And I had tried telling one of my uncles about it. I never told my mom. My stepdad never asked me what happened. But when I went to go tell one of my uncles, it was like he just put it all, oh, you were still dreaming. That's all it was. And that hurt me so bad because I knew I was not. And it was around 2009. I want to say about 2000. Yeah, about 2000. No, it was around 2008. I was a big fan of Coast to Coast AM from the Art Bell days. And this was now when George Norrie has come in as host. And I remember listening to the show that night, and they said, and we have a special open line for your doppelganger story. And I was listening, and, it didn't give me any effect until he said, a doppelganger, or ghost of a living person. The moment he said that, I was like, oh my God, everything came flooding back. And I was like, I'm going to call in. So I actually called in and got on the show and told them that story. But something I figured out that to me personally is a little more chilling is I put some simple math together where I saw what appeared to be my cousin, whom was just, a 1 year older than me, sitting there cross-legged on the floor. Was there was no way for her to physically put her hand up without stretching it about 6 foot to fit in the middle of my bed. So there was possibly more than one entity in my room at that night that, whether it was trying to lure me over there or what, I don't know. But I do know that was one of the experiences that I know now was something that, I just at that time couldn't explain. But as you probably see in the very next one from March 6, 1986, it didn't stop there.
Yeah, that's actually some really powerful stuff there. And with the doppelganger phenomenon, it's funny, you can throw that out there, and there are other entities that people claim that perform the doppelganger-esque trick. When we talk about in Appalachia and places like that, we hear the word Wendigo or Wendigo, or however you want to pronounce it. I pronounce it Wendigo. Skinwalkers and Wendigos are two different things.
I know.
Yeah. We don't have any Apache Indians out here, and but you hear those things, and they mimic a friend or a person or a voice. And a lot of times you hear with doppelganger experiences that there's not a physical manifestation of the doppelganger, but I call it the mockingbird syndrome, where they kind of just pantomime or mock somebody familiar with, the voice of an uncle, the voice of a sibling, voice of a cousin or something like that. Mm-hmm. And to actually have that as having the manifestation be a part of it as well is pretty darn immense. That's it's kind of shocking, especially as you think about the whole of the situation that you see this story from beginning. Now we're kind of in the middle of it, as far as the list goes, and we see that, each step seems to be progressively more intrusive into your life. And that's what I am, there's a level of concern that I have. And of course, there's a level of complete interest. I'm an investigator, so it is completely interesting as well. One thing that I would ask, Micah, is that during all of this, and I know we all kind of grew up in a time frame where this wasn't necessarily something that people did a whole lot, but was there any of the adults around you at that time concerned enough to have you like evaluated or anything like that, or were they just playing it off as childlike imagination, or what? That's something that really, I grew up in the same era, so I know, all of my stuff was like, oh, that's just your imagination type thing. It was blown off. Mm-hmm. So, how did that actually, was there any of that in with you in your experience?
Or did you ever get around to actually telling anybody any of this?
Yeah.
Well, when I never told my mother, and my stepdad never asked, but I know just from my memories of my mother, we would share our dreams together. That was where we always had common ground. My mother would share her dreams with me and ask for my interpretation, and I would do the same for her. She was very spiritual. She very much believed in the paranormal. She had shared some of her experiences with me as I got a little bit older. And there was a lot of experiences she told me, I'll tell you one day when you're older. But unfortunately, because she was lost to me in 1993, that day never came. But I would like to think that she would have believed me, and I don't believe she would have tried to pass it off as, maybe there was some, something that required an evaluation. Had I told some of the other members of my family or anyone around me, that very well could have happened. But when I shared it with my uncle, it was roughly about, I want to say it was in the late 90s. And that was, and the reason I shared it with him is because when we moved out of that home, he took the lease over and he was living in that home. And I was kind of sharing it to see if maybe he had a situation while he was living in the home that may have been similar, of which, that kind of just put me off of it. And like I said, I felt, even though it was his way of dealing with it and his right to do so, I can't help but say I felt betrayed when I shared that with him, that he just insisted I was dreaming. And I just basically, at that time, just put it to the back of my head. Didn't even think about it until that, that trigger when I heard them, give another definition, which was ghost of a living person on the Coast to Coast AM show. But I will say, in the future, an evaluation did occur, but not because of that.
Oh, yeah, and I, coming from that, a more scientific point of view, you want to look and see if there's other rationale there, obviously. But the fact is that during that time, and again, in the mid 80s and in times like that, I was young, but I remember, as a result of some of my family's experiences, that it was, most guys, they didn't talk about anything like that. You know what I mean? Like like you said, your uncle, oh, you're just dreaming type thing. And it was still kind of that post. Women were the ones that had the disorders type situation. That was very much a belief back then. And so I was just interested to know that anybody have the thought that, hey, maybe, is what is happening, is he seeing this as real? Is it a manifestation of vivid imagination, or did anybody look further into it? That's all I was getting at there. Mm-hmm. But we you go on to say that this it continued further, and as let me see here, I got to pull up my notes. It says my doppelganger terrorizes my school. My grandfather dies in March 6, 1986. So this is, you can say, almost 2 years after the initial doppelganger begins. Almost 2 years. You have further experiences with them. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yes, this one actually would very much be alive in the memory of a lot of my schoolmates, and most notably the vice principal, one of the vice principals at the middle school I was going to at the time. To just state, on March 5th, 1986, I had gone to school, and me and another classmate, one of my best friends, Trace Long, we got into a scuffle in a social studies class, and it was considered fighting. So we were both given 1 day suspension, which was to be on the 6th. Well, back then, there was this handy little hack that if you were suspended, you had to get to your mailbox the day you were suspended to get the note and forge the signature to say your mom found it and everything. Well, me not telling my mother I was suspended, I acted like I went to school the following day, but grabbed my boots, my waders.
I think we all did that, right? We probably all did that at least once or twice. I saw Jeremy do it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that is 100% true. I did do it, but it doesn't help when you misspell your mom's first name.
Oh my gosh. Well, I had a similar one, but mine was a little bit more laughable. I assumed that the mail could not move that fast. So I figured, it's not going to come till the day after. Boy, I was wrong. But I went to school that morning and acting like I was going to get on the bus. And I met a gentleman that agreed to cut school with me. I don't think he was suspended, but he just wanted to cut school. A gentleman by the name of Stanley Tilton. And we met up at the bus stop. We both had our boots, and we started walking back to go spend a day fishing and smoking cigarettes and, just hanging out along Winyah Bay and in the marsh, going bottle hunting. To me, I was actually quite excited. I had some playtime back there. As we were walking back there, his stepmother, I guess, had somehow found out, and all of a sudden a car pulled up, and she yelled at him to get in the car. She yelled at me to get in the car, and I was like, oh no. And I didn't listen to her. I kept walking. I was like, no, I'm not getting in trouble. Well, he ended up getting busted, but he never, from what I found out later, he would not snitch me out to her as to who I was. I went back in the woods and I stayed there, all day till it was about appropriate time for the bus to get there. And I went over to my grandparents' house first, and I remember walking in, and this was probably the end of an era, because there was a door-to-door salesman that was showing them a lot of cutlery. And when I walked in, I saw him in there, and my grandmother just looked at me. I saw my grandfather there. And she said, Micah, go ahead home. Your mama's expecting you. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yes, ma'am. So I turned around and walked out. I went home. My mother had got the letter. Oh, boy. It was third degree. You know, she didn't spank me or anything at that time. She sent me to my room. I remember looking out my window, just trying to, you know, grasp everything, and I saw my grandfather walk by. And at that time, he had just had a stent put into one of his heart valves, one of his veins. It was a big surgery a few months before, so it was regular for him to, at the time, he was 67 years old. He was doctor required. He did his walk every day, and that was his walk. About probably 20 minutes after that happened, I heard my mother answer the phone, and she began screaming. She didn't tell me what was going on, and she said, Micah, come on, we have to go. And not knowing what was going on, that was literally the last moment of what I would call my innocence, because I actually thought, man, this is cool. Me and Mom are running through the neighbors' yards together. You know, I didn't know what we were running to. And we saw the front door wide open at my grandparents'. My uncle and my cousin's vehicle was there. And as I walked in, my oldest cousin, David, he was an EMT, and he was doing CPR on my grandfather. And you had to give me a moment here. Well, they took him to...
Take your time.
Yeah, they took him to the hospital, and he passed away shortly thereafter. That kind of overshadowed, of course, the events I was guilty of that day, not telling my mom, being suspended and all that. I was kept out of school for the rest of that week, and I went to school that following Monday. And I remember the vice principal, Thad Holly, very good man. He was awesome. He walked up to me, and you know, I didn't know how small of a town it was. I didn't know that he knew my grandfather, but he said, Micah, hey, I'm real sorry about your grandfather. I'm sorry to hear that. But you know, you could have got hurt up there. And I looked at him shocked. I'm like, ooh, what are you talking about? For some reason, I was like, why did he call walking in the woods at One Yaw Bay getting hurt up there? And he said, how did you get out? I want to know how you got out. And I said, what are you talking about, Mr. Holly? He goes, look, we all saw you. We were hunting up there for you. A couple of people, you know, got some bumps and bruises trying to find you up there. That wasn't smart. And again, I'm like, what are you talking about? And I think it was the honesty on my face. He kind of knew there was something to it. He says, Micah, we know you came to school that day and were hiding up in the attic, basically, you know, in the upper level. Now the school it's now, the school has been reverted now to a Georgetown Education Center where they keep all the records and everything. But at that time, it was J.B. Beck Middle School. And come to find out from all the and next thing I know, all the kids are walking up to me, high-fiving me, going, man, how'd you get away from them, dude? And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, dude, we saw you peeking in the classrooms, everything. They saw me running in the halls. Everyone saw me at school that day when I was not there. They, from what I heard later, they even called the police department to help look for me because they thought because they couldn't find me, I might have got hurt up in there, up in the rafters in the crawl space, and might have been injured. And it. The reason that's one of the reasons I state that there were several witnesses that I definitely did not get on the bus that day. But, all the people that I went to school with at that time, they didn't believe me at all when I said no, I was not here. And now I did notice that none of them said they spoke to me. They just saw me. And, that is it related to what happened to my grandfather? I don't know, but that was such a powerful event to happen on that same day that it was very much worth the mention.
I'm going to jump in here. Just recounting from what we know so far, beginning back with the very first event, the Demon Desaad back in 1976. It seems to me, and I'm going to throw out some correlation here, and this is just me and from what I'm taking away from it, and then Joey, I'll let you chime in with what you think. But it seems to me, because you made mention of this earlier, that you kind of alluded that maybe when you were younger, that you had some sort of an attachment, or maybe you felt that way. So you brought this comment up when we discussed about the child that died alive, and of course the accident with the van.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's my take on it. If you go back to your second event, the Dark IQ results, test results, you said that you used to, for whatever reason or another, you wanted to write your name instead of Micah. You wanted to write it as Mark. It seems to me that whatever attachment that you believe you had at that time, during your accident, with the van, that maybe it had detached itself from you at that time. And like you said, was trying to take you out in a different way. But now it seems to me in my head that whatever that attachment was has come back and has tried to manifest itself as something more familiar to you. And it seems now, I don't know, because unless we're missing some sort of crucial detail here, I cannot correlate between your grandfather's passing and your doppelganger showing up at the school. But I find it very interesting nonetheless that it's presenting itself now. It's getting other people involved. Other people are witnessing this manifestation, and I find it rather interesting. Joey, when you were talking earlier about these things, a demon can disguise itself. They can become some sort of a familiar doppelganger. It reminds me of a mimic. I've seen a lot of videos here recently, where people have actually caught, whether it's a elaborate hoax or not. That's up for debate. But I've seen a lot of videos here where people have claimed that they have been walking, maybe with their significant other, maybe they're alone in their house, but they have captured on video their own voice being like something using their voice from another part of their house or out somewhere in public, and it's calling to them in their own voice and like trying to get their attention. Hello, hello. Almost like a raven would do, or ravens are pretty smart creatures, and they can talk. But it kind of reminds me of that as well. And even though this thing had no verbal communication with anybody that day, it appears that it did try to communicate with you that night. You saw the doppelganger of your cousin. And so, I find that pretty interesting. So, whatever had tried to get you to begin with, it seems like has come back. Joey, I'm going to let you take it from there.
All right. Well, that's exactly kind of what I'm seeing as I see this path. It would be to me, not impossible, but improbable that this would be all unrelated, spiritually unrelated experiences. So, one person having numerous experiences over the broad spectrum of time that we're looking at I just find that to be um, improbable that it is not a singular entity that is either attached at some point to that person um, or something, an object or something that is routinely manifesting itself in some way. And as you look at the entirety so far of this story, you see that there is a positive progression of more aggressive tactics, for lack of a better term, but they are tactics to influence Micah. And so that's what's got me kind of on the edge of my seat with all of this is that we see that this thing is consistently evolving its tactics, improving its tactics, changing its direction of attack. I think, fortunately, Micah is, it sounds like, being really strong willpower wise, has been able to avert anything highly detrimental to him personally or physically. But that being said, we definitely see this consistent pattern of improved tactics by this entity, and it would almost seem like this is an entity or a small group of entities operating together to have this influence over Micah's life, and it's pretty consistent from the time he was very young up until he's gotten older. So yeah, I 100% agree with you on that, Jeremy. And I think that is worthy to note that we talk about these generational curses in a way, and we generally talk about those. And I'll say this: preachers will talk about generational curses in church, and they really place them the emphasis on them too lightly a lot of times because it's, oh well, my pappy was poor and my daddy was poor and now I'm poor. That's a generational curse. No, probably not. But something like this and with happening within one generation, I would love to have more information, like to look deeper into the world of Micah's family pre-Micah to see and know those things, which we probably we can't, but and to see how maybe these things have a family connection in some way, because that's oftentimes how malevolent spirits attaches through family members or openings, gates, portals, whatever you want to call them, that other people open, don't know how to close properly or manage, and then they become attached. So there's a lot of questions still here overall about the why component of it and the how component of it. So the when and where, Micah has detailed it out very, very clearly, and has kept very detailed notes of it and has very good memory of it, which is amazing. But that's kind of where I stand. I agree with you 100% on it, Jeremy, that this is something that's probably following Micah through his journey through life, and has been pretty unrelenting and even increased their tactics a lot.
Definitely, and I'm kind of excited to see how this all ends and where this ends up.